All right, so welcome to session 15 of Classic Metal Class. Scott is here with me, and he's actually going to be talking a lot, not just about lyrical content, but about gear and tech and approaches in music, because the topic that we have this time is a reprisal of a previous topic where we were talking about metal covers and what makes them metal. And we've been kicking this around since that session, and we thought that, and this is kind of an interesting hypothesis that I'd love to hear what other people have to say about this. If we want to see by contrast, a metal song and then the original that the metal song is covering, maybe we would do better to not focus on certain genres that are kind of low-hanging fruits, where it's what we call metal adjacent, like blues or hard rock or punk or even AOR stuff. And maybe we should look instead at metal covers of pop songs or jazz or R&B, things that are not as close to metal. And then what makes this metal, what makes this successful metal, might come out a little bit more clearly. And so we've got a number of bands and songs that we talked about last time, but we've got a whole bunch of new ones as well. And I think we're going to do a deeper dive on some of these. For example, Saxon's cover of Christopher Cross's Ride Like the Wind. They also did a cover of Toto, Hold the Line, interestingly enough, as well. So what were you going to say, Scott?
Well, Hold the Line is a pretty heavy tune.
Yeah. So do you think that one doesn't fit into the matrix of what we're looking at here? Is it too hard rocky or?
Well, here's what's interesting. Steve Lukather, the guitarist, was one of the, of Toto, was one of the most recorded guitar players through the 80s and 90s as a session player. Everybody that's owned albums, he's on them. And whether it's Cher, Michael Bolton, Chicago, but he's actually, as versatile a musician as he is, he's like, a shredder. He's a heavy player. And but with the Toto stuff, especially the Toto stuff up until the 90s, was very, I don't know, they called them and Journey early AOR.
Yeah.
But Hold the Line makes sense to me. As like I've toured with R&B bands that like the groove of that, so we would play it in the set. But I've also been in heavy bands in the past that want to cover it because that riff is so heavy.
Yeah, there's something there that's not yet metal, but is easily turned into metal, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, Mark asked an interesting question. Where would you situate Western classical music, stuff like Bach and Beethoven? I mean, as far as like the purposes of this, we're talking about metal bands covering that. And I think you can talk about a few metal covers of classical music where they take classical music as it is, instrumentalize it in a different way and make it heavy. But it's more often that there's an incorporation into the song. So think about Accept's Metal Heart, right? Where it's for Elise that they take a little section of and put it in there. It's not the whole song, but it's a portion. And Savage's Hall of the Mountain King comes to mind as well. The song off of that titled album. And we could talk about like the neoclassical metal people. Yngwie Malmsteen comes to mind as sort of not the only originator of it, but like a very important early figure. And here's where Scott would I don't listen much to Yngwie Malmsteen, and I know that you've listened a lot more to him. I mean, how many, we wouldn't talk about a cover song, we would talk about taking a line or a passage from a classical piece and incorporating it, right?
Well, Blackmore used to play
oh, right.
Oh gosh, why am I forgetting? He actually played, he played it on electric guitar. Which one did they play? But Yngwie used to do Beethoven's Fifth in his concerts, like on an acoustic. He'd do some arrangement of Beethoven's Fifth. And I think for him, it was he was trying to prove how legitimate he was. But, he's not a legitimate classical musician by any stretch. But I think European metal, they definitely, you're right, there's a lot of quoting going on, but there has been like, metal treatments of, a lot of it is Bach-esque. If you listen to the phrases, Yngwie is clearly stealing phrases from Bach pieces.
I think that's right. And why do you think that is, given like the, broad spectrum of other, musician or composers that they could pick? Why is Bach so attractive to them?
Well, I mean, I can say for myself, and it's kind of widely regarded, if you listen to Bach, we all say one thing: it's perfect music.
Mm-hmm.
It's some of the most genius music I think that was ever written. And Paganini was another one for Yngwie, and Paganini was very much like Yngwie was. Paganini was a very kind of ornate figure.
Okay.
And he pushed the what the violin can do, and his pieces were very, very difficult. So I think there was some where Yngwie had this talent, and he would work on these pieces with his electric guitar. And I think he was pretty much interested in it, but him and Blackmore kind of brought this to the forefront as a new genre. But and this is my own opinion that I'm putting here, not as a fact, but I think there's a kind of a badge of honor. It's like, I like the real guys, it's kind of like, the people that are like, well, I like pop music, like the Kiss FM stuff, but hey, with metal, it's got to be Sabbath, and it's like their badge of honor to like the
right.
Some of the best stuff. So that was a really good question, actually, because European metal in the 70s and 80s, even Michael Schenker, you would hear kind of some quotes, but like, Yngwie did, cover something like on acoustic guitar or something that was a piece, like whether it was Beethoven or like a bit of a Bach or something.
I mean, Randy Rhoads comes to mind as somebody who's doing stuff like that as well. And sometimes it's getting into his actual like recorded compositions. And sometimes it's like, well, this is the stuff he does on the side for fun. Right.
It's interesting you said that, because Randy was just starting to look at classical guitar, and he was studying Leo Brouwer pieces, the composer.
Okay.
And Diary of a Madman is literally, one of those, I don't remember the Brouwer piece, but it's literally Leo Brouwer and Diary of a Madman.
You thinking about D?
No, Diary of a Madman, the song, the whole song.
Yeah.
And that's like a Leo Brouwer kind of thing. And he was working on that, and he clearly brought that to the table as a Brouwer-esque thing, but I only recognize it because I know Leo Brouwer's work.
Yeah. So what we've got in a lot of cases is incorporation of things that are classical, but not complete covers. Mark has another one that's an interesting suggestion too. What about Hendrix's cover of the Star Spangled Banner? Very iconic piece, right? And is it metal? I mean, it's arguably proto-metal, as Hendrix's work in general is. It would be, one of the greatest what ifs of heavy metal history is, what if Jimi Hendrix hadn't died in 1970? What would his contribution have been like, as bands like Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, UFO, all of these were bursting on the scene, I don't know. I mean, Hendrix's version is definitely a cover, right? It's an instrumental cover. It's doing some very innovative stuff. The Rockets' Red Glare, he's trying to use the guitar to what would be the musical equivalent of automatopoeia, where a word sounds like the thing. He's using a guitar to try to present us with a soundscape, right?
Well, that's the thing. So the version of that, it's a great one to bring up, because Jimi Hendrix was, of course, one of the greatest innovators ever. But the thing about Jimi Hendrix is nobody can really copy him. He was a sonic.
Mm.
You know, if you ever heard Machine Gun from the Band of Gypsies, we call it the control of feedback. And what feedback is if I have my electric guitar and I have a Marshall cranked up, and you get in that one spot where there's a loop where you start hearing that.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the Star Spangled Banner, he'll hit that sweet spot where he'll get it, and his intonation is exactly what he wants when he puts the bar down. And you know, people will just say, well, he's just making a bunch of noise. No, I mean, that was like and that's the thing that blew everybody away. You know, we always called him an alien. Not that I was on the planet with him, but you know, we always refer to him as an alien, I mean.
Yeah.
And because I often still listen to Hendrix through my monitors very loud, and he doesn't have a shrill sound, and it's just, so the Star Spangled Banner was really interesting. And if anybody saw him on the Dick Cavett show, you should look it up, because he gets asked that question. Dick Cavett says, well, why are you playing the Star Spangled Banner? You know, and he said, I don't know, you know, they made me sing it in school, and you know, I thought it'd be you know, and then he said, well, you know, and he says to the audience kind of jokingly, like Dick Cavett, you know, before you send your hate mail to him, this guy was a paratrooper in the army or whatever, because Jimi Hendrix served in the military. And Jimi Hendrix says, what do you mean hate mail? And he goes, well, when you do something unorthodox with a piece like that, that's so kind of sacred, you're going to bring you know, anger. And Jimi Hendrix kind of looked off and said, that wasn't unorthodox, I thought it was beautiful. And it was just and it was just you know, I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but that's a really insightful question.
Well, I will bring up a tangent on this and a bit of a rant. You know, when you hear the Star Spangled Banner sung, as you so often do before ball games or stuff like that, I myself can't stand how people feel like they have to embellish upon it in a way that makes it their own, but isn't making it their own. They're just like every other person, inserting a whole bunch of extra notes and flourishes and stuff like that. And, you know, compare that to Jimi Hendrix's own version of it, which is raw and straightforward, confident. I'm sure plenty of practice went into it, but it's very different than the generic, almost, you know, show-offy saccharine style of things. You know, when we're watching these, you know, like a football game or something like that, we often just mute it, because you know, my wife is a bit more forgiving towards that. I don't want to hear it. You know? Well,
you know, you hit something great here, Greg. You mentioned something about Jimi Hendrix that, you know, what he was playing fit with the lyrics, right?
Yeah.
And what we heard with Jimi Hendrix was communication. I have a distinction with artists, so that he's communicating. However, I agree with you about the people that sing it, because they're demonstrating.
You know, and what they do at ball games is when we hit the Rockets red glare, that's when the pyrotechnics go up.
Oh, God,
so that's something separate from the singing, right? It's something that the singer can count on basically as like a prop, has nothing to do with them, right?
Right.
Other than they're giving the cue, hey, time to shoot the rockets up. So not that I'm against like pyrotechnics at all. I mean, when I was a kid, I actually wanted to be a fireworks maker, believe it or not.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, didn't happen, even though there was a fireworks factory literally just down the road from where I grew up, the Bartolotta fireworks factory. And if I was serious about it, I suppose I could have gotten in there with them. We should come back to our main topic. So we're going to look at some covers. And, you know, so we're not going to look at these metal adjacent genres. You know, for example, Judas Priest, Better By You, Better Than Me. Spooky Tooth is arguably a hard rock band. So we will look at Diamonds and Rust, but we're not going to look at Better Than You, Better Than Me, even though it's an awesome metal cover. We're not going to look at punk to metal like Megadeth's Anarchy in the UK, which I'd say is about as good as the song it's covering, but I don't think either of them are particularly great. We're not going to be looking much at blues. We talked last time about Aerosmith's Train Kept a Rolling as kind of a definitive metal version, probably better than Motorhead's version or other ones. So we're going to be looking at, genres like R&B or softer rock, easy listening, perhaps, right? Pop, jazz, stuff like that. And there was a funny quote that I wanted to start us with. It's a little bit of a take on Hey Jude. I found it on Femme Metal Rocks. So it goes, "Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a pop song and make it better. Remember to add some riffs and a solo. Then you can start to make it metal." Now, is that all it takes to make something a metal song? It's a what we would call a perhaps necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition, right? I mean, songs already have riffs. You could do something with the riff. Adding a solo, okay, that might contribute to it, but there's a lot more that goes into making something metal. And I was going to talk first about ethos, but maybe this would be a good place to switch the order a bit and have Scott talk a bit about, on the one hand, gear and tech, and on the other hand, let's call them the sonic aspects. What contributes to something really being a metal song?
So there's a lot of nuance. So take, I don't know if everybody's heard Ozzy's cover of Staying Alive. And now that sounds funny, but and of course, if I remember correct, it starts off with everybody get on the disco train instead of the crazy train, right? And so it's kind of seems tongue in cheek at first, but I'm pretty sure he did that with Dweezil Zappa.
Okay.
That was Dweezil Zappa on guitar. And if you listen, everything's identical, but why is it driving like a metal tune? It's the drumming. That's it. So the drumming in the Bee Gees version, there's kind of more of like a double time on the hi-hat, like it's a little funkier. Here, I don't know who the drummer on this track was, but they were rock solid. There was no kind of there was no kind of like accenting on the drums. It was, here's the downbeat. And if you listen to the hi-hat specifically, the two next to each other, in Ozzy's version, the drummer's playing halftime. Halftime means if it's going da 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 da, halftime I do. Right.
Yeah.
So and what that does is that allows room of the Staying Alive riff, which Dweezil plays note for note from the original. All of a sudden, that allows that riff to settle and sound heavier than it did at the previous one, because it was kind of like a funk lick. And so here's an example of everything was the same except the drums. And rhythmic subdivision, I think we all know rhythmic subdivision is essential to how a groove lays or how it's presented. And a lot of people don't think about the bass or the drums. And the bass sound, of course, is going to be a lot brighter on the Bee Gees version. And it's going to be a lot more mid-range. Here on the Ozzy version, if you listen to the tone, it's a little more, it's heavier.
Fuller in the lower end, right?
Yeah, right. There's more in the lower end, and it's like instead of focusing on the mid-range, which a lot of funk bass players are, disco or whatever. So the rhythm section, not the guitar or the vocals. The guitar and the vocals are the same. So the rhythm section made slight adjustments and it became heavy. So
that's very interesting, because I think a lot of people would automatically assume that what you need to do in order to make something metal is primarily about the guitars. You turn the distortion up, you add in some more low end, make the solos much less sort of lyrical and more blazing or something along those lines, and now you've got a metal song.
Well,
But
a good example of that, sorry to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
Tank's Chain of Fools.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. Yeah,
It's a great cover. And here's the thing, what you said is true about this. The original guitarist was Cornell Dupree, who was on every Atlantic record, all Aretha's, and he's got this riff, if I may.
Sure.
So
we get a treat this time.
Kind of like understated. So, but what I don't know if I have the right key, but Tank with heavy distortion, it's the same riff, but it's power chords and it's full. So they keep the guitar hook. The guitar hook is very subtle on the Aretha version, but it's not subtle. And they actually bring that subtle Cornell Dupree part out in your face. And they kept, I think, what was important to the tune. And then, and you know, in that context, the lyrics sounded kind of metal, like in the sense of, you know, you know, they really sold me on it. They really sold me on the lyrics in a different way. And I think that's a cover gone right.
Yeah.
You know? And so what you're saying is true. Is like, in that case, it was like, let's keep that riff because it's important, although it's subtle, but let's really bring it out and make it heavy. And it's not a simple formula, but you know, but I think they did a really good job with that one.
Well, this is an interesting feature. So if you think about some of the genres that we're talking about, they might be less guitar forward, you could say. I mean, you think about a metal band, the guitarists are in the front, you know, they're oftentimes the showmen. There are some exceptions, right? Lemmy, bassist, out there in front, and Motorhead is whoever's Lemmy got playing with him while he's still alive. But well, and Steve Harris, you know, arguably as well, right?
I agree.
He dominates the stage no matter where he is, even today, as old as he is. But a lot of the, you know, so R&B, pop, you know, even soft rock, you could say the bass really plays an important role quite often, that the guitar it's occupying a space that the guitar is not occupying. Whereas with metal, guitar is always in the mix, unless you're doing a bass solo or unless it's like a bass lead in or something like that. And so some genres, I think R&B, good. There's so much great bassist stuff happening in, especially in Motown, that somebody could take a lot of those songs and transform them quite easily into metal songs. Maybe the lyrical content might be tricky depending on the song, but the you know, the rhythm section stuff is right there.
I agree. It's like, you know, first one that comes to mind that would not work is I'm a Soul Man. But you know, what about some of Sam Cooke's stuff? I mean, Sam Cooke's one of my favorite singers of all time. And you know, I don't know what one specifically, but like, you know, when any of the artists that talk about heartbreak, you know, if they're gonna, that's a theme in, you know, Love Gone Wrong.
Yeah.
That's kind of a crossover, I mean, into a lot of genres. And I think if the singer can sell the sentiment of the lyrics, and they have to be able to do that, like we're talking about the Star Spangled Banner. Yeah. You're not buying it from these people because they're being not genuine. So when so like, you know, when I heard Tank's version, I said, you know, I'm like, this well, you know, to go back to Tank, right? Lyrically, one of their biggest hits is called WMLA, Wasting My Life Away. And it's a song that I myself, you know, cover, playing it, you know, on the banjo and singing it. And it works, moving it from structure to structure, because it's a very sappy, romantic song. You know, it's the chorus that plays 3 times is it's about being in the rain at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. You know, it's about heartbreak and
all sorts of things along those lines. And it's, if you were just to read it by itself, the lyrics, you would be like, this is not a metal song. But with the right bass, Algie Ward singing and playing bass, the right drummer, and then, the right, in that case, two guitarists, they can sell it.
Yeah.
I mean, they also have songs like about falling in love with a stormtrooper. They're very oriented towards armor and war and things like that. But they also have a great song that is heartrending about, and it's a later song about a child's life being lost, falling through the ice, and the grief of the parents struggling with that. So a lot of it really depends on how it's played. Mark points something out kind of interesting, and I'd like to hear from you on this, Scott, because you watch a lot more musical stuff on YouTube, and I know that you have some very strong feelings about some of this. A lot of metal covers on YouTube are like what we were talking about. Metal means distorted guitar and growling, no nuance. So covers on YouTube, there's lots of people putting them out there. Some of them are quite cool, where that's like the same person playing all the different instruments, and it's like a split screen and you can see them doing that. Quite a few of them are pretty mediocre, right?
Yeah. The thing about covers, and I see this with a lot of my students, they'll do a cover of something that's big.
Okay. And, big at the time, you mean? Like it's likely to be forgotten down the line, or?
No, big meaning it's gonna it's being searched heavily. So like a cheap shot would be if you and I said, let's do a cover of War Pigs.
Yeah.
And so every time somebody puts in War Pigs, Sabbath will come up with So Will We. And so one of the, this isn't everybody's, but one of the inspirations, or one of the things that inspire people to put covers on there, is they think they're going to get attention out of it. They're going to get follows. They're going to get like clicks. They're going to get, and that's why you're seeing a lot of mediocre, because it's not people like sitting down as a band going, let's work this out. Let's work this section out. It's just kind of, let's throw this together. It's already a great tune. And just the fact that, everybody searches for Stairway to Heaven or something, right?
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes I'll look for an obscure tune, and usually obscure tunes come from Europe. Like one time I was looking for covers of Kiss's Reason to Live, and there's a lot of them from Sweden.
Okay.
Like Swedish bands, and then just female singers, because that's, he was singing really high in that. And a lot of these people don't speak English, but like can kind of sing the words, and
like Klaus Meine back in the day.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. So I think I don't know if it's so much, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think the covers are so much a tribute when people kind of get together and go, let's cover this. We'll get recognized. We'll get more likes. We'll get more followers. We'll get influencers. And it's the old thing that we used to do in clubs when we were younger. And I never agreed with this, where it's like, well, what you got to do is you go to the cover clubs and you sneak some of your originals in. Well, the drinking crowd doesn't want to hear your originals ever. That's the wrong demographic. And so it's kind of like the same thing. I followed this one girl that did all these great AOR tunes. She's Russian. But then at the end, she's like, please listen to my music. And I never did, because I was there for the hits.
Yeah. And that goes kind of way back. One of the bands we're going to be talking about that did lots and lots of covers on their actual albums is Van Halen. And that's in part because they were a cover band, and they did covers remarkably well. They had a massive catalog, and that's part of what put them on the scene. And there was kind of a struggle, because some clubs that they were, earning money from and getting into would not let them play original stuff, and other clubs would. So you can ask, what's the motive behind doing a cover? Is it to try just to attract attention, like Scott was talking about a moment ago? Nowadays we do SEO, search engine optimization, and you can like do a Google search and find, which song titles are getting the most hits. And then you could be very savvy that way, but that doesn't guarantee that your cover is actually going to be decent. And it could be a metal cover. I think maybe we have to distinguish here, doing a metal cover and doing a good metal cover, because there are a lot of terrible metal covers out there. Mark brings up another thing too about pop culture mashups. Metal covers of non-metal songs is quirky enough to catch attention from a mainstream perspective. Yeah, I think, and I think that's the case today in a way that it wasn't back when metal was less mainstream and more, not necessarily an underground, but an outsider kind of genre. Like when Scott and I were growing up, you could actually get beaten up for wearing, a jacket full of patches on it if the jocks caught you, right? And you would not be hearing
Or the
heavy
punk.
Yeah, you would not be hearing heavy metal songs being played as the filler music at sporting events like they are today. I mean, you watch the NFL and like Crazy Train comes on, and every time that happens, I'm thinking to myself, God, this is weird, because back in the day, all the people in charge of that hated us.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good sociological perspective.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing we won't get into, but that is true. The music that happened, if you went to your football game, even like your high school football game, you might
wasn't going to be the band playing Black Sabbath as it is today.
You got Sousa marches.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I remember when I was in band, and I was only in it for freshman year because I hated it. And we had like we played some ELO stuff.
Oh, cool.
Because
really?
A bassist came in and we were supposed to do that, but that was like our treat for like a day. And then we went back to all the old stuff, Yeah, cool. I played clarinet and I quit doing it because I was like, I'm into this other kind of music. And, obviously I could have like learned how to, if I'd known about klezmer or something like that and the possible crossovers,
Sure.
maybe I would have stuck with it. But I was like, I don't want to play this crap. I want to like learn some other things that are closer to the music that I actually listen to. So,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so this is a good segue into talking about ethos and lyrical content. And so, if we're asking this question, what makes a song metal? We've talked about some of the sonic elements. Just coming from a metal band doesn't necessarily make it metal, because a metal band could have something that's arguably non-metal. Think about Judas Priest's Before the Dawn.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a metal song. It's a beautiful song.
I love that song.
Yeah, but I don't think it's arguably metal. And as we mentioned, some non-metal songs are like almost ready-made for metal, but something has to bring this out. It can't just be, oh, I'm going to turn up the amps, turn up the distortion, and there has to be some exploitation of the musical capacity, something almost like in chemistry where you catalyze something that's there in solution. And maybe some songs don't have that, and other songs do. And I do want to point out one, I said we weren't going to talk about hard rock, but there is one hard rock song that is seemingly irresistible to metal bands to cover. And I've heard very, very few good covers of it that do justice to the original. And that is Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild. Even bands that I really, really like Raven, I don't want to hear them do Born to Be Wild,
Or Blue Oyster Cult. I mean, that was on 2 of their live albums. I mean, they could have put one of their own songs on. Why are they putting covers on at the height of their career of their live albums?
And why that particular cover? Why? I mean, again, here's where I could, ask you as a musician, why do you think that one is so attractive? I mean, there are dozens of metal covers of that song.
Because we have to remember that, we have our growing up through high school, we had the music that was current. And I think
Yeah.
for a lot of the metal bands, Steppenwolf was one of the like the probably cooler bands, right?
Okay.
As they were in high school.
Yeah.
And so that before, they made things heavier, they would get psyched up by hearing Born to Be Wild, and maybe that never changed, and of course, the sentiment of it, Born to Be Wild is pretty metal,
Yeah. Well, it's got the word heavy metal thunder in it.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Heavy metal thunder. I think, sometimes I forget that when I say, why would they cover that? Well, they had those records when they were coming up, before they were playing, before they were in a band. And this is stuff that, because they're made a career out of music, I have to imagine that music moved them through their childhood and high school years. And, they probably had the posters on their wall too, or cut out from a magazine. And, it's funny, you ask even metal players, that are, a little older, they're like, yep, the Beatles, Ed Sullivan, 64. That's why I'm here. And I love the Beatles, but you're like, you're just such a metalhead or whatever. And you're like, nope, the Beatles. And of course,
this is interesting, because you might say that, at least with classic metal, maybe not so much with like the genre stuff from the 90s onward, it's in part the openness to other genres of music that allows the ferment to happen that takes them, it's different in the 80s, right? If you look at what bands would say their influences were, the bands that were coming up in the 80s, they would say, well, I listened to Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, and they'd name all these now classic metal bands from this, the 70s and early 80s off. This is actually a good place to bring up something that I found Blackie Lawless saying in an interview. He was asked, I was wondering what kind of musical environment you grew up in, as you've done some cover songs on your albums out of the most popular 70s rock bands like Jefferson Airplane, Somebody to Love, The Who, The Real Me, and Forever Free, and Elton John's Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. Wasp covering an Elton John song is kind of an unusual thing. And so Blackie Lawless says, my mother was a big fan of Little Richards, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and all that stuff. I've always had that music in my house. And I've got a sister who's like 8 years older than me, who's a big Beatles fan. So, I had Elvis Presley in one room and the Beatles in another going at the same time. I've always had that kind of music around me. When I was around 10 years old, I heard Born to Be Wild for the first time, and that changed me, So I always had music around me and I was exposed to it. So I had a big jump on everyone else that was my age when it came to music. By the time I was 15, Black Sabbath had already been out for maybe 3-4 years. And I remember them being 15, guys telling me they were hearing Black Sabbath when I was young, for them 3 years ago, when I knew about them very early. So it's interesting that remark, because on the one hand, you've got the pre-metal rock influence stuff, a pretty heady brew right there. And then he's already exposed to Black Sabbath long before his classmates are as well. And he, as a musical guy, he's thinking about this sort of stuff. So I think there's, this is sort of what you're talking about there, right? These musicians who you look back and it's kind of unusual things. Like, you ask Steve Harris, well, who were you listening to? Well, UFO, and I really liked this guy, Pete Way, and then Yes, and all this stuff that's not metal at all. I mean, UFO is arguably metal a good bit of the time. And these things play an important role. So it would argue why you might want to cover things, like why it could make sense for a very heavy band like Wasp to cover, and also a very, from its early on, a very almost hyper masculine band like Wasp to cover somebody like Elton John.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, there's the appearance reality factor. I mean, when we grew up, there was no Twitter. We didn't know what stars were doing everything. We didn't know their political opinions.
Everything was in our imaginations and in the magazines we were reading, or if we're lucky. something
was
on
part of the
MTV.
world that they created. So, you have it on the wall. And like, I remember even being at a show and, the PA music's playing. I'm like, I'm wondering what they're doing backstage. Are they even in the building yet? And we'd have to like fill in what was missing. And I think, they'd be these bigger than life people. And of course, the interviews we read were probably very, the record label would say, you cannot ask this, you can't ask this. And this is before, somebody had access to Twitter and go, I'm having cereal right now, I'm going to go to the gym. And we'd be like, ooh, don't go to the gym. Like, that's not cool. That's not metal. And I think, to a degree, we just figured that they, I just, just a little off topic, even Jeff Scott Soto, who sang with Yngwie, just posted a picture of him and Jeff Tate in Seattle in 1985 when he was singing with Yngwie and, Queensryche was playing. And I'm like, see, now at the time, I would never know that these guys hung out. I thought they were all rivals. I thought they were all like, gangs kind of thing. And now that stuff's coming out, it's like, oh man, we've known each other for years. And isn't this great? It's like, the way that it was shown to us was what we needed to know, which was exciting. That they created a world and we wanted to get the merch. We wanted to be close to whatever that was. And that's why it's so odd to hear Blackie Lawless say the Beatles or Elvis Presley. Like, oh, you even know who those people are?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it kind of like dates him further back, right? But sure. he is a pretty old guy. And, we often, it's almost as if we'd forget when we were teenagers that this was not music that was being made by teenagers for the most part. There were a few exceptions, like Rock Goddess. The drummer was like 15 when their first album came out, and the oldest one was like 18, I think. But for the most part, these were people who were in their 20s or 30s and were working hard, and probably as you've pointed out with like Kiss, had a routine down. They weren't partying backstage. They were like getting hydrated.
Well, that's the big shocker to us, right?
Yeah.
Who can forget this cold gin rant? Me and my friends used to do that rant daily in the hallways. We met some people backstage that like vodka and orange juice, and they're like, we like cold gin. And it's like, but it turns out they don't drink.
Yeah. So, the other thing that we were going to talk about in terms of ethos, and I think we've already mentioned this a little bit, you can do a metal cover where it's a really great transformative, this becomes your thing. Like we're going to talk about Saxon's Ride Like the Wind or a few other ones. And you can also do mediocre covers where it just doesn't really work that well. But then you can do covers where it's almost sneering. It's sarcastic, it's ironic, it's like, and I think this happens a lot more in punk and in alternative stuff than it does in metal. Now that I bring it to mind, where you take something and you're like, look at these jerks, we're going to take their song and we're going to mess it up,
Or a famous one, my brother was at a show, I forget the band, it's a famous punk band.
Okay.
And they came out and they opened with Surfin' Bird, right? Like the old, was it 50s,
Yeah.
Bird is a word, bird.
Yeah.
So, but the trick is they didn't stop. So every time it broke down, he'd come back in, and he did it until the crowd left. They didn't stop. It was like 45 minutes of Surfin' Bird. They didn't do anything. So, I mean, that's almost like Andy Kaufman performance art.
Yeah. I mean, not to say that comedy isn't compatible with metal, obviously, right? But
you paid for tickets.
Yeah, and sometimes I think the song could become a parody without the band intending to do it that way. So one that I have in mind was one that we were going to talk about. Ugly Kid Joe, a metal band from like the late 80s, their version of Cats in the Cradle. It's definitely a metal song. I think they just kind of messed the song up. It doesn't convey, it certainly is metal, but it doesn't convey much of the ethos successfully of the original song.
I
Now
remember that.
Mark brings up as a snarky cover, Megadeth's cover of These Boots Were Made for Walking, which is another song that we were going to talk about. It's snarky. It's snarky towards the person it's talking to in the song. It's not snarky towards the artist. And I think that's an important distinction, right?
Yeah.
So it's not saying Nancy Sinatra, look at this floozy, you know, who is she to sing about boots or something like that? But it is definitely, and you know, there's other Megadeth songs that are snarky in a similar way. Think about Peace Sells, but who's buying? You know, you say I'm not kind, I'm not your kind, right? They're pretty good at that sort of thing. I think it's actually a great metal cover, and I think they did take it and make it their own. And when you read Dave Mustaine's recent autobiography, so Mark says, I thought it was Mustaine taking a poke at boomers. I don't think it was that. I mean, the Gen X, versus boomer thing at the time that's coming out wasn't quite so pronounced as it was in the 90s. Dave Mustaine would be on the very early end, I think, of Gen X, right? He'd actually be, I think, at the cusp of boomers and Gen X. It's more like, hey, this is a song. I kind of think a lot of early Megadeth stuff has two primary targets. The girls or guys that Dave Mustaine doesn't like, because he's writing almost all the lyrics, and Metallica, who's kicked him out.
That's who you meant at the beginning. The guys, he doesn't like. That would be Metallica.
Well, there were other guys he didn't like too.
Yeah, sure.
I wasn't just Metallica, but he really he carried a real chip on his shoulder about them for a very long time. And I think rightly so. I mean, they did. He was a drunk. They were drunks. The way in which, this is a total tangent rant, the way in which they fired him was pretty crappy. They behaved in kind of a cowardly way, I would say. I mean, it's interesting to think about what Metallica could have been with Dave Mustaine remaining with them and Cliff Burton, being there as well, if Cliff Burton hadn't died. But they just couldn't keep it together personality wise. So, but it's a good example of the sort of thing we're talking about, because the Nancy Sinatra song is nowhere near metal, right?
No, gosh, no. I mean,
so let's take that one. What happens to that song, Scott, that actually makes it metal? The lyrics don't change. Well, they do change a little bit. He has some things that he adds to it, about sex and stuff like that. But what musically?
And along with the lyrics, it's kind of like I wanted to point out too, Paul Stanley had to switch the gender of and then She Kissed Me.
Right. Yeah.
So and it's so funny because we were talking about that one and I knew which tune you meant, right? But then He Kissed Me. I mean, well, we already talked about the rhythm section being very key to the groove. So if you take a song and I've said this before, but I think it's important to reiterate. If we take just the lyrics and the chord progression, and you see maybe on a staff, here are the chords that go above, and here's the melody line, and here are the words. So we could take a look at it and go, well, the words could, are open to be a country song or a pop song or actually this would work in metal. And actually just like, but then this is the production side that, I was going to get to. So let's say that somebody brings you and I just the lyrics, the melody, and the chords, and we have nothing else to go by. There's no demo, there's no genre involved. And you say to me, well, let's make this metal. Now we have nothing we have nothing to go by. So like when he does the Nancy Sinatra, well, there was something to depart from. But if you simply take the boil it down to and take style out of it, then it's kind of like, how do we rebuild this? And we already know how to play a heavy groove, a rhythm section, that's their forte. And then you have to consider the melody, and you can actually play with the melody, the rhythm of the melody. A lot of these,
you mean like the phrasing, right?
The phrasing, yeah. So like you'll hear in a lot of these tunes that it's clearly the melody, but they're changing the phrasing of it. The reason they're changing the phrasing is because it went from this kind of groove where the rhythms or the phrasing, but if they tried to sing it exactly like, say, Nancy Sinatra, well, it wouldn't fit. So what we have to decide is, well, what do we do great? Well, you know how to play metal bass, you know how to get your sound, so you be you. And then well, what if we add this? And then what we would do is we would build the song from nothing. So I think for it to be successful, you have to boil down, you have to like forget the genre, you have to boil it down to what's just there and try to rebuild it. Now, I don't know if everybody would say that. That would be, if I was producing something and somebody's like, we want to do a cover of this, I take away everything and say, forget what you know, but here's the melody, here's the words. And I think the more successful ones are the more creative ones, that will get creative with, well, I don't know, that when I say this lyric, maybe you should do something on the bass here, like higher up, or, and that's when you.
Well, I mean, a prime example of that where the song changes dramatically is Judas Priest, Diamond and Rust, right? Diamonds and Rust, where an entire, like, I think 2 verses are dropped out. Why exactly? I don't know. I mean, I've looked up a lot of background material on that, and I never really found a satisfactory answer to why.
Bold.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's bold to leave out the lyric content.
Some canonical stuff. Yeah. But it makes a song work, in a way that it effectively becomes a new version of the song. I remember hearing it when I was a high schooler. I had bought Judas Priest Sin After Sin while we were on spring break down in Pensacola, not in Pensacola, in Panama City Beach, Florida. I think we were over in Pensacola buying some supplies, and we were like in a Target or a Kmart or something like that. They'd always have these bargain racks for tapes, where you could buy them for like 99 cents or a buck.
I always bought those.
Yeah, and I bought Black Sabbath's "We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll," which I didn't have at the time, and Judas Priest Sin After Sin. And I had a boom box, and we were out on the beach, and I'm playing it, and I was like, wow, this is, I mean, the whole album it's one of my favorite Priest albums of all time anyway. But the stuff that we were listening to at the time was a lot heavier. It was Defenders of the Faith, arguably their heaviest album ever, and Screaming for Vengeance, which is pretty close, right? So Sin After Sin, different kind of production, different kind of guitar stuff going on there. And Diamonds and Rust did not come across to me as not being a metal song when I heard it, and I didn't even know the Joan Baez version. I thought this was just an original Judas Priest composition.
That's what I thought.
Like, this song rocks.
Yeah, me too. And it'd be cool to take a poll to see how many, Priest fans realize it's a cover, because I didn't.
Well, that and Green Manalishi and Better by You, Better Than Me. I mean, they did a couple other covers, some of which were not as successful, like Johnny Be Good, which probably belongs in the cover Hall of Shame. But I don't think anybody's going to think that this was an original Judas Priest composition, whereas Better by You, Better Than Me, maybe they would. Mark points out, so let's actually talk about this one, the Green Manalishi, right? The Fleetwood Mac version of the Green Manalishi is just a hot mess as far as I'm concerned. You listen to that and you listen to Judas Priest, much tighter, much heavier composition. In a way, Green Manalishi is really only a good song when Judas Priest is doing it.
The only version of that I know is the Fleetwood Mac 3 CD set from the Boston Garden.
Okay.
And that whole CD is a mess. It's just like 6-hour guitar solos. And I remember somebody giving it to me, go, hey, Peter Green's got to be your guy. And I do love Peter Green, but not in this, in the 70s arena. So it's like 3 hours of
self-indulgent
nonsense. So I agree with you there. I think Mark, I think the word is focused. They become focused.
Now, let me ask you this though, Scott. So a composition like the original Green Metal issue that is a mess, is that in a way it leaves more room to improve upon, right? So is it better to do covers of things that are not already amazing songs? Like, here's an example. Motorhead, right? They've done covers of a number of things. Two that I would focus on here. They did a cover of David Bowie's Heroes, which is an awesome song.
Oh God.
The Motorhead version, it's good. It's Motorhead. It's, when you listen to it, you can like tell what it is, but it's kind of boring in some respects because it's just a plodding bass line. Yeah. Lemmy's not doing anything particularly interesting with it. It's, guitar riffs that are heavy and distorted. But Motorhead's version of Louie Louie, it's pretty good,
I don't know if I've heard that one. God, that sounds so like, right now without hearing it, why?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I imagine because, first of all, Lemmy liked it because it's, classic rock and roll,
Actually, that's a good point. You know what? You're right.
But it is a song that, because it's pretty simple and there's not a hell of a lot going on, and it's just some guys, making up, singing some almost indecipherable lyrics, and it's got a good hook. There's a lot you could do to improve it. Oh, this is interesting. Mark says, I've seen an interview of Dio saying he believes Louie Louie is a perfect song. I would have to see that because
that's cool.
Somebody like Dio, you got to say, what is he thinking?
Well, there is a thing to that, I love That Dirty Water, Boston, You're My Home. And it's on the surface a stupid song, but you listen to it and it's just got the way the reverb is, it sounds like the times. It's not great, but there's what we call the X factor, the unexplainable. You know what? That's I think Crimson and Clover, the original, so many people have covered Crimson and Clover.
Right.
The original is like one of the more beautiful,
Okay.
And just because of the sound, it's just like, it's perfect. I think Crimson Clover, nobody should have ever covered it because you can't do that. Well, however,
you can't improve upon it, you mean? Or
I don't think you can't, no, because it's perfect. And it's like really the performance and the way it was recorded was completely honest. It was very honest, and it was but it's interesting about like Dio saying that that's a perfect song, and I'm sure he expands upon that. No, is a perfect song.
Mark has a follow-up here. Is a perfect song uncoverable or most coverable? And so maybe we have to talk about both, but there's two different kinds of perfect in that way, right? There would be songs that would be almost, so we're thinking about extremes, like infinitely coverable because they provide you with just the right raw material that you could take, and provided you're not, a mediocre band, make into something of your own. And then there would be those that, like Scott was talking about, you can't actually improve upon. The song is already as good as it's going to be in its genre, and maybe it can't be transported to another genre adequately.
Well, it's like Sleepwalk, the original from the 50s. If anybody knows the song Sleepwalk, you've heard it a million times, and it's pedal steel, and everybody's covered that. It's been covered to death, and I go back to that 50s recording going, can't beat it. Now, this is just my opinion, though.
And we brought up Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild.
And Magic Carpet Ride. Who's going to do a better job on Magic Carpet Ride?
Yeah, there are some decent metal covers of Born to Be Wild out there. Like I think about Riot's version of it, which is probably my favorite, but that's still nowhere as good as Steppenwolf's.
Right. In my opinion, so like I guess Mark, we're not answering your or I'm not answering your question. Let's say I guess I'll have my own criteria. I'll offer my own criteria for doing a metal cover of a song.
Yeah.
First of all, I have to love whatever the song is in the first place. So that's mine. I'm not saying it's other bands. So, if I hear a song a bunch, and let's say Greg and I have a project. Hey, Greg, I really love this tune. It's just a great tune. And I wonder if, it would transform to metal. So that would be the first part of the process is,
okay, do
I love this song? The next thing is, do I think I could do it justice?
Yeah.
Do I think, like I wouldn't touch Crimson and Clover. I wouldn't get somebody to sing it. That's not for me. I'm not going to, I already have the record.
Now, this would be you recording it as like your own thing. It's not like you wouldn't play it at a wedding or something like that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're right. Thanks for clarifying that. It would be me like, okay, Scott, we want you to put 2 covers on your next record.
Yeah.
And they have to be, metal versions of. And so then I would be very thoughtful about the process. Some of the stuff we've talked about today with the lyrics being enhanced by something like you said. I love what you said about the Jimi Hendrix. We're not hearing the lyrics, but we all know what the lyrics are. So we're kind of singing along with him. And then, while we hear this, he's giving us this vision, or he's giving us this audible kind of movie. And so, sometimes I go like, why this? So I guess, if Dio were to do Louie Louie, I'd go, why? But if he said, because I think it's the most perfect song, then I would say, okay, so you're, okay, gotcha. And there's a lot of Dio interviews I'm far behind on, I'm sure. But is a perfect song uncoverable? No, it depends. If you like it, you can cover it and do your own thing with it.
Yeah.
If it's a perfect song, or do you want to mess with it? I hate when people mess with it. So, like as far as like if they completely change the harmony, and this is stepping outside of the metal, but Shaka Khan, what was one of her big songs that David Foster produced. Anyways, when she did it live, the musical director would put all these different reharms in there and like make it like complicated. And we
should point out too that Scott has played with Shaka Khan, so he's talking here from experience. So go ahead.
So, and my friend Jay and I, who's a session guitarist in LA, we're listening. We're like, the band's great, but what was wrong with the David Foster version? I like those chords better. And, for somebody to kind of like, well, I'm going to make this better. I'm going to make this more jazzy. It doesn't really work out. Like I've heard somebody do Todd Rundgren's Can We Still Be Friends? Well, they changed the harmony and changed it to something different. And now I didn't enjoy the version. I didn't enjoy the treatment of it. And they took the magic chords out, the magic harmony out that gave me chills. And so really in art, you can do whatever you want. I can put random brush strokes going, this is my interpretation of Degas, and nobody can tell me I'm wrong. But I guess it's us as listeners, talking about, like Ride Like the Wind, I thought was fantastic.
We're going to come back to Ride Like the Wind, but there's a song that comes to mind for me is just, I don't think it can be improved upon. And that's Black Sabbath's Zero the Hero, from the era when Ian Gillan is the singer, just for that one album, an album that didn't get a lot of great response, in part because the production wasn't that good and the album cover was just terrible. And that's Born Again in 1983. But it is one of the heaviest of metal songs. And I remember years and years back when somebody who thought they were like doing me a favor, they sent me the Cannibal Corpse cover of it, and I was like, this is, I mean, I'm not into this genre anyway, but they did not do justice to the song. And as I think about it, so there's actually Godflesh did a version, Black Symphony, and Sauron did versions of it. And I'm probably not gonna go listen to them, in part because I don't think you can actually improve upon that song. That's the song that if I ever get to like walk out on stage to like a riff or something, I'm taking it from that song. And so I think there's quite a few like that. It may be, when we listen to like tribute albums, metal tribute albums, where
right.
metal artists are doing somebody else's stuff, I think there's some Motorhead songs that can't be done any better than by Motorhead, or some Iron Maiden songs that, I mean, there's so many versions of the Trooper out there. They are never going to be as good as the original, the Trooper. I mean, even if you play it on a harp like that one lady does, it's very cool, yeah. But it's not the thing. Alfonso says Cannibal Corpse is good at Cannibal Corpse. Yeah, and that's a good way to describe this sort of jargon about when we're talking about a band's style, taking another band's work and putting it into their style. Yeah, Judas Priest is going to Judas Priest, right? Iron Maiden, when they do very early in their career, Skyhook's Woman in Uniform, it's going to be that sound to it. And that was with Paul Di'Anno. I just watched the video for that last night. Actually,
you did?
Andy and I both watched it because when I was playing it, she was like, who's that? And I was like, well, that's Iron Maiden. You recognize them, but it's Paul Di'Anno singing. And there's actually like the whole band is singing harmonies on it, which is a little bit unusual.
Alfonso, this is, I'm glad you brought this up, because this slipped my mind as Greg and I were putting the notes together. Now, the first thing that strikes me weird is, let's talk about someone like Yngwie, who in interviews constantly says he has no influences except for Paganini and Bach. And then he's been quoted as saying, I owe nothing to Ritchie Blackmore. And then one moment he's saying Hendrix is God. The next thing is like, I didn't like his music. I just like that he set his guitar on fire. That made me want to play. And so we're talking about somebody that's got this kind of
telling stories, right?
What's that?
He's telling stories, and in the pejorative sense. Some of these stories are probably not true.
Yeah, but now here we go. Now he did cover all these, and Rush, this Kansas, I would that was a shock to me. Like, it was such a shock that he would say, I'm going to pay tribute to some people, and
yeah,
that's probably the most shocking. If we're going to talk about it from the other end, about the ethos of the person covering, well, this is somebody that would never play a cover because he's obviously the greatest thing that's ever happened. And Ritchie Blackmore was okay at the blues stuff, he would say, but come on, he dressed like Ritchie. He had Ritchie Blackmore's moves. He played the Strat through the Marshall like Ritchie. And
to take this in a different direction and possibly open up the opportunity for a rant on Scott's part. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is people who claim that they're self-taught, right? And nobody's really self-taught in any real sense, because you're always learning from somebody. Even if you're just like copying stuff off the radio, hey, you were listening to the thing on the radio, right? And this notion of like, nobody influenced me is kind of like the claim to be self-taught, which usually goes along with, I'm not like all those phonies over there. Right?
Well, it's a badge of honor, right?
Well, it's presented as such, but is it really a badge of honor? I mean,
no, it's not. You're right. It's presented as, well, they think it's a badge of honor.
Yeah. Why would it be a badge of honor though? I mean, why, what's wrong with, saying, yeah, I learned from this person, and then I transformed what they're doing. You'd never get somebody like Dio saying, oh, I was self-taught, man.
Well, it's Mark, because I'm super original. No, a lot of the people that I came up with, in the clubs and played, they were the least original players that said they were self-taught. Because I used to have these discussions with them that like, oh, you're studying with Charlie Banakis and, you do all this practicing. I'm self-taught. I go, what do you mean you're self-taught? I just heard your set. You played a series of Jimmy Page licks. And, my argument at the time was, unless you were born in a bubble and never heard music and was handed an instrument,
you wouldn't know what to make of it. You'd be like, what is this thing here?
And now if you created something on it, then you'd be self-taught. But, I also asked the question, and I think it's a good question. Well, I learned from people on YouTube. Okay, so if the people were in the same room as you, that wouldn't be self-taught. But if they're on a computer screen, you're saying you're self-taught. Like what is, and then when I push people to say, what does self-taught mean? And then I have the other argument, which is, or we're all self-taught, right? So I could, I give.
What would that possibly mean though?
That would mean I can teach mechanics, right? I could teach you scales. I could teach you ways to organize pitches and all this stuff. But
well, you could, because you actually know that stuff, but
right. But let's say I teach you and they go, Greg Sadler, you're not self-taught because you're studying with Scott Tarulli. But here's the problem. There's a leap you have to take that I can't take for you. And that is you putting that together in music. It's like saying for English, we're self-taught. I didn't go to school, but I can speak English. Well,
of course we all did go to school.
Well, yeah, I know, but like, it's kind of like that would be it's kind of a silly comparison. So the self-taught part is you can't make anybody a good musician. I can try to guide you, but most of my students don't sound anything like me. Not all of them, none of them sound like me. And how is that possible if they're, not self-taught? Well, they put it together in their own way and they had to reflect upon it. So I guess I'll finish with this is because you're right, it's a rant, but I think anybody that's a creative person, right? So if you're a creative person, no matter how many or how few tools you have, you're going to do great stuff with it. So this thing about you're going to ruin your creativity by learning. Well, no, because do you become non-creative when you learn stuff?
Well, and then this goes back to that thing, people are surprised that, say, Blackie Lawless would want to do all these covers of classic 60s and 70s music because it's not metal, right? Well, being open to learning from other genres probably makes you more able to grow as a metal artist. If you confine yourself just to a genre, which I think can be a risk for some people in the present. Although Scott, you would know more about this from the actual musician side than I would, where people come in and say, I'm interested in death metal and maybe a few other adjacent genres, and that's all I'm going to listen to. These are the only bands that I care about. Well, you're probably, you're narrowing your area of study far too much. It's like people too in philosophy who are like, well, so I'm going to go on a rant myself. People in the modern Stoic movement who are like, I only read Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and maybe a few other things. I'm not going to read Plato. You can't make me. And you're like, first of all, buddy, nobody's making you. Everybody gets to develop their own mind. But if you want to know, like, what other important philosophers have taught in the field, I mean, it might be a good idea to read more widely. It maybe not just read philosophy, but also read some history and some literature. Some other things, but you do get these people who are very, very single-minded about what they're going to. Yeah. So Mark points out, by looking to the resources of another tradition, you can better see the weaknesses in your own.
Oh, I agree with that, Mark.
And you can open ground for musical innovation. Yeah.
No, Mark, that's well said. I just wanted to respond, Mark. You said, don't they sometimes just mean that they didn't get formal training? Well, what is formal training? What's formal training? Does that mean, you had a piano teacher come and sit at your house next to you on a bench? Is that formal training? Basically, if you're saying you're self-taught, but you're stealing licks from albums and you're looking at where people put their fingers on in tutorials on YouTube, how is that different than somebody being in the room doing the same thing? And ear, well, if you're formally studying, your ears are going to be far superior because extensive ear training is involved in, if you go to a college, say, and, people lifting stuff by ears, but then you get these people on stage where nobody tells you what key or what song is going to happen. Somebody with the experience is going to be able to smoke that gig and make $600. Somebody can call me tonight. I won't know a thing about the gig and I'll do fine because I have ear. But by ear is like, them, rewinding the tape and approximating what it is and slowing it to half speed and getting, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying there is a community of people that that kind of think you're a sellout if you've learned something from somebody. And my argument is we've all learned something from people. When I started out, I didn't have formal training. I just learned every Maiden song and got whatever I could. And then I got more interested in other things, Mark, like you said. I was very narrow-minded, only to metal. And as I went on, it was kind of, I agree with exactly what you said it so well, Mark, that I heard West Montgomery. I said, well, what's this? This is kind of cool. And what you said, Greg, it's like, the point of philosophy isn't just to stick to one school because they all kind of interact or react if it's like anything like music. So so and so led to so and so's thinking, and you could expand on that better, but having that narrow mind, well, people come up onto it when they're ready. It's kind of like me trying to tell somebody that, you should play jazz. And, what I tell them is like, well, if you want to play jazz one day, you might, come up to it and you might, you might be really interested in it. So, and that's them exploring it and being self-taught and going down their path.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of analogies here between music and development and learning and what we could call academic, / theory stuff. Rob points out, to see what some thinker or artist is responding to, you can better understand it as well, which is perhaps really relevant to the issue of metal covers. And I think that's quite true.
Yeah, Rob.
And, I'm going to say that, so what Mark was saying here about looking to the resources of another tradition, that sounds very familiar to people who've read Alistair McIntyre in philosophy, who talks about how traditions, draw upon each other. A good tradition is one that has its own integrity, but it's also not just dismissing all the other ones. That's what keeps traditions healthy. Traditions can't be strictly identified with institutions. There's something more that has to happen there. So I think there's a really rich conversation that could be had about this, drawing analogies between these two. And I'm going to bring up another wrinkle to this. In philosophy, one of the things that I, because I get asked a lot of questions by younger philosophers who are like in grad school or undergrad or trying to study on their own. And sometimes they'll have, and I'd be really interested to hear what Rob has to say about this because he's a philosophy professor as well. Cool. I get people who are like, my professor tells me I shouldn't read this person. Don't waste my time on this person, or it's going to, damage me if I'm reading this. And I'm like, well, screw your professor. How do they know what you're actually supposed to be reading? And you think that reading a book is going to break your brain? Well, I mean, if that's really the case, then don't read because you're really badly off, right? That would be like saying, if you listen to Duran Duran, you're not going to be able to play metal anymore.
Well, you joke about that, but I have that. I get students that come in that want to, and they would study with hardcore jazz people, and they would come in and they would come into me, I'm an open book, and what are you into? Well, I've been studying jazz for 2 years. Well, great. What do you like to listen to? Well, I really like, this metal band and this rock band, but my teacher told me, if I listen to that stuff, it's going to screw up my time and I'm going to be regurgitating bad phrasing. And I said, why would they say that? And well, I don't know. And I said, so have you stopped listening? Yeah, I stopped listening. They said it was bad for me. And so now, but when you were saying that, my eyes lit up because I've had students say the same things. This professor said, don't waste your time on this. or this is not real legitimate, whatever.
Yeah.
And you get people that become kind of like bullies and hindering people's chance to explore for themselves, to find themselves. And yeah, I'm sure you've probably read plenty of philosophers going, but you read them and you understand it, and you can explain why maybe you don't.
So Rob says this is true, but it has to be balanced with the finite time and resources available. And I totally agree with that. So if you're supposed to be reading Plato, well, you better be reading Plato. But that doesn't mean that you can't also read, Xenophon and Augustine or whoever else, provided you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing, and not just getting infatuated with the greener grass, right?
Well, I took what you said to be different. I took what you said to be, don't read that philosopher, it's garbage.
Well, that's what people do say. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like, this, Rob has a good point about, well, there's actually not, if the teacher were to say, why are you reading this? The class is about that. And you're not, reading Aristotle, and you should be. That's a good point Rob has, and I'll tell students, I'm like, listen to what you want, but whatever we're working on conceptually, I need you to work on that. But, whatever bonus time you have, do whatever you want with it, because that's part of who you are. It's part of how you grew up. It's your influences. We're different generations. We're different. You have your story to tell. And hopefully if we become good enough musicians, we can all express ourselves.
So we are getting a little short on time, and this is a great conversation, but I did want to bring up a few things that we have about some of the songs that we're looking at. So I did some digging, and I found a discussion by Biff Byford, the ostensibly not just singer, but the center of Saxon, talking about "Ride Like the Wind." And this is in an interview. Somebody said one of the subjects touched on is the band's Destiny 1988 album, which is much maligned even by the band. And he says, well, the thing is, it was a bad time for Saxon then. I think the content of the album seems pretty good to me. The songs are great, SOS and stuff like that, but we were going through a lot of bad things and the album really saw it. And that might have been kind of a tough time for some of these bands, 1988 anyway. And then they bring up, there's a great cover of Christopher Cross's Ride Like the Wind on there. And then Biff Byford says, yeah, it's the best song on the album, actually. It's a great song. Christopher Cross sent us a message saying he really loved our version. We used to play that Christopher Cross album. We had a cassette with all the different songs on for the bus we used to travel around on, and that song was on the tape. So when the record company said, we need a song that's more like a rock and roll Wheels of Steel type thing, the producer said, have you got any ideas for a cover? So I said, yeah, Ride Like the Wind might be good. So me and Paul transposed it. Christopher's version is quite jazzy, but catchy. So we developed the catchy side of it. And Paul did a great job with the guitar and chorus into that rock. I mean, and here's really interesting, it's a massive song. At the time, people were a bit, Ride Like the Wind, and connected it with Christopher Cross being a little bit more softer. But as time's gone on, the track has become an absolute massive live favorite. So this is a prime example of a great metal song that was able to be transformed from a very different genre to the satisfaction of the original artist. I'd be curious, Scott, what do you think he means? He contrasts jazzy and catchy, and he says we emphasize the catchy side of it. What does that actually mean?
Well, the jazzy he's not really using that correctly. It's a lot of metal artists, if you're using non-traditional chords that aren't kind of basic major and minor, then the generic word is jazzy. But that riff, the ba-da-da-da-da, so like that's a hook. And so what he means is they kept what really made the song strong, like the hooks. And then there's a really cool part of the song. If you think of Ride Like the Wind, think of when he goes, I've got such a long way to go, and then the drummer goes to halftime. And they kept all that, and it was I think I agree with everything he said as far as I think the guitarist did a fantastic job. even when Christopher Cross plays it live, you know, he takes an extended rock solo at the end of the tune over the da 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 da.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Now that part is kind of, I guess that's where they kind of think it's jazzy. The da 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 da. But they kept that in there, and they kept that hook there. But because I thought to myself, when we get to that part of the cover, I wonder if they're going to skip it, because that would be what they would see as jazzy. But they didn't skip.
Yeah.
They actually did a great job. And my favorite part of that is that Christopher Cross, you know, reached out to them and said, that warms my heart. That's just great.
That's like what the Judas Priest, Joan Baez is saying, hey, my kid loves your cover.
Thanks for doing it, because I'm cool now, right?
Now we can contrast this with Twisted Sister's Leader of the Pack, which is, you know, it is a metal tune. There have been some interesting interviews from former members. You know, Twisted Sister is broken up. JJ French says, I regret that Leader of the Pack should not have been the lead single from the Love for Suckers album. I don't think there was a mistake in recording it. And now this is really interesting. We used to play it in the bars, so we knew it worked for the bars. I think the emphasis on the song as a single was a mistake and helped usher in the end of the band. Mark Mendoza, the bassist who was interviewed, said, when we made Come Out and Play, I believed it was wrong. I didn't believe we should do a theme album. People did like it, but I just wanted to do hard rock, heavy metal songs and a few anthems, in your face metal. There was no reason to try to make a masterpiece at this point. Give people what they expected of us. That's all. And then he said, a song like Leader of the Pack did not belong there. We did it as a spoof and a novelty thing in the club. So this is ethos stuff, but it shouldn't have been on the album. And then, you know, he says, you know, it was a massive song for the clubs because people really liked it. And he said, I was the only one who didn't want to do it back then. We took a vote, and out of the 5 guys, I was the only one who didn't raise my hand. The record company, management, and the rest of the band believed this was the right way to go for us. And so, you know, it's I would say it's not a great cover myself. I don't know. What do you think about it, Scott?
I remember
like it, or?
No, I remember it being on the radio every hour, you know, on the rock station. And I remember being so disappointed. But now yeah, absolute spoof. You know, another spoof, not to get off the subject, we forgot about Typo Negative doing Summer Breeze. So that's no metal lyrics at all. And I think that was Pete Steele trying to be funny.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody here has heard that. Typo Negative did a cover of Summer Breeze.
Well, that would be the sort of what we call ironic, right? Or
ironic, right?
Parodic, yeah.
And I think I saw Typo Negative a few times, and you know, he takes shots at himself, you know, and you know, I remember one show he's like, oh, you think I'm a jerk, huh? Well, you paid $5 to get in here, $5 American dollars, and we're getting paid. So who's a jerk, you know? But like, you know, the $5 thing was just kind of like, you know, we paid more than that, but he's he's kind of like putting himself down that like that's all they're worth. And then he would throw like toilet paper out, and he want you to toilet paper the room. So they were kind of they were great, but they were kind of a comedy act.
Yeah.
So as far as the ethos, what you expect?
I mean, and we are going to do a session just on parody metal later on down the line with, of course, you know, Spinal Tap and Steel Panther featuring heavily in that.
Oh yeah.
But we should take Mark's comment, and then we should probably wrap this up. Think about something like Anthrax's cover of Public Enemy's Bring to Noise, bringing together 2 genres not usually associated, and arguably an important step to new metal, which, love it or hate it, was commercially massive, particularly in the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah. So when we're talking about fusing things together like that, it is a cover, and it's transforming. I mean, Anthrax, I'd be curious to see what you think about this guy. I mean, they start out as a band that is doing more straight ahead, you know, competent speed metal / thrash, and then they start spiraling off into all these other things. But they did have a back history through SOD of doing a lot of kind of goofy stuff.
Anthrax.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. So what's the question?
I guess the point is bringing together these two genres.
Oh, right.
You know?
So yeah, I was trying to find the right word. I think the thing I loved about this, and this actually, well, let me finish my thought. I got to keep getting better at this. I tend to like go off onto the next thought. So I thought socially this was really cool because Anthrax was doing something that the fans may have hated, but the fans loved Anthrax and said, well, if Anthrax thinks they're cool, then maybe we're going to check this out. And it's
That's
kind
a
of
good
what
point. Yeah.
And that's kind of what we saw with Aerosmith and Run DMC. Remember when they did Walk This Way? Because there was, Daryl from Run DMC said, everybody in the neighborhood used to try to rap that. You weren't cool if you couldn't do Walk This Way. So that brought like, the new emergence of like this hip hop or rap and classic rock. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the school was buying Run DMC, and the kids that were listening to Run DMC were like checking out Aerosmith. And I think these are kind of Mark, this is another great point. I think socially this is really great. And then what it does is it does fuse the genres, and it breaks down walls into, sometimes as fans, people are like, I only like this kind of metal. I don't like this metal. I don't like this. And I'll never listen to country, and I'll never, but what if, Black Sabbath did something? I don't know, maybe they'd be, like somebody iconic does something, crossover, and the fans go, oh, well, because they did it, maybe I'll be open to, and I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Bands have once they reach a certain stature, they have a certain influence that they can exploit to move music. Now, you could also, if you go too far, you can really screw things up. You could think about some bands that have like, well, who is it that was doing the dancing around and base in the video, and basically like ruined.
You're not talking about Bowie and Jagger.
No. I mean, they could get away with whatever they wanted, basically.
That was a close call, though. We were all pretty disappointed when they did Dancing in the Street, and that video was awful.
Yeah. It's not coming to me, but this is probably a good place to close things out. Milli Vanilli, yeah, that was a whole different thing. They got caught lip syncing, which I guess is a big no-no, especially if it's a live performance.
And at the time, it's widely used now, but at the time, it was really, the CD skipped, right? That's how they were caught, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then, so, and God, and Kelly Clarkson. No, not Kelly Clarkson. Who's the one that got caught on SNL?
I know what you're talking about. Wasn't she like the younger sister of somebody else? Ashley Simpson. There we go. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. And that was just God.
It's sort of like actually, this is another topic that Scott was pitching to me yesterday. The sort of agreement between the bands and the fans. What are the unwritten rules governing this? And I think we're going to do a whole session on this next time. Lip syncing seems to be a violation of that. It certainly is for metal. I mean, if you have a metal band that gets up there and suddenly the track skips, that's a big problem for them.
Well, Motley Crue is playing to mostly tracks the last tour.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, because it was mostly tracks, and people were calling them out that were at sound check, and then it went viral, kind of viral, and then or when they use fake harmony vocals, that's a big no-no, because do it the way, it doesn't have to be just like the record. I mean, to me, that's a disappointment.
Yeah, and this is really an issue for older bands where musical pipes are wearing out, and maybe the fingers can't play as fast, or
that's part of the experience that I pay for.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess people say you have to put on a good show. Put on your best show, or don't go out.
That's something that D. Snyder has made a case for a number of times. He actually, so we did a thing about this a long time ago. What do bands owe their fans in terms of farewell tours? And D. Snyder he's made, quite extensive ethical arguments about this, saying if you can't perform up to the level that you should be doing, you don't have any business being out there on stage. That's why I'm not doing Twisted Sister anymore and just Widowmaker, because I can't jump around safely like I used to,
And the answer of using backing tracks is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Because
Mark has a great line here: retire a hero or perform long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
And that's true, because that's, we were discussing, and just to touch into it, that's where as a fan you feel slighted and you get angry, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you paid your $200 through Ticketmaster, and you go and you find out the band's playing to tracks, and what a slap in the face for somebody that's bought your vinyl records and your posters and looked up to you for 3 decades. What a way to treat somebody like that,
Yeah.
And you'll have more to say on that. I think you'll have some great insight, but I know as a fan that these things would make me angry. Like, you spend time buying these people's albums, and I remember meeting Jack Blades, and he couldn't have been more rude to me. And I got really upset. And I shouldn't have taken it personally, but I took it personally because I was there from the first record with them, and I paid tickets to see their shows. And, all you had to do is, I didn't want anything from him. I just introduced myself and said, it's really a pleasure to meet you. And he goes, yeah, are you part of the meet and greet? And I said, was that happening? He goes, no, you missed it. And so he didn't want to talk to me. He didn't want to even say hi to me.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And I just thought that was, wow. Okay. So, I've been a fan for all this time, and this is what I get.
It's a lack of acknowledgement, and it shows ingratitude. That's something we could talk
magnanimous about. That I think it was Mark that brought the word magnanimous up, right? In that episode a few times ago. Thanks, Mark, because Greg and I discussed that later. And I've been keeping that kind of to myself to think about the position you're in, then how you should act, how you're held to a different standard, and should be held to a different standard.
That's true. Rock stars, maybe there's instead of being, all about privilege, it should also be about commitment and responsibility, but that's a topic for another day. So thanks to everybody for all the great, comments, suggestions. I enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure Scott did.
I really did. Well. Yeah.
So this is our first reapproaching a topic, but we may do this again in the future, and we'll see all of you next time around. Scott, you want to take us out? Do you have any last things you want to say? Or
no, actually, I just want to say, everybody, thank you so much for joining in. It's always insightful, always gives me something to either rant about or think about But I like how we start with something, we cover it, and then you bring up interesting stuff, and I end up getting more out of the conversation because you're here. Greg and I'll talk for 10 hours straight about metal, but it's great to have some other people here.
Some other perspectives. Yeah, it's very important.